Good morning, everyone. I am really glad you all could make it early in the morning for the conference. It's quite late here, but I would really like to welcome you all for the day one of Design Research Conference 2023. I am very excited for today's lineup and what all is in store for design research community. And this is actually my first talk in a completely different continent. So let's begin. Today, we are going to talk about learning to listen and listening to learn together. And I'm going to take you through my reflections from designing for and with children. And I understand it's a little bit of long talk, but don't worry, I've got you covered. We are going to do some kind of interactive activity in the middle as well. So bear with me in this. So today we are going to talk about listening. And I have been contemplating about listening since quite few years now. Listening is an intimate act and an innate soft skill, which is often taken granted in the design profession. I say this because, on a professional level, I'm an advocate of user voices, but I often think that I only listen to reply to people than to actually understand them. So, in my process of learning to listen and listening to learn, I have taken it as an approach to better learn to listen to people and also unlearn my biases and my initial assumptions about them. So, we are going to reflect on my journey of listening, specifically for a marginalized segment as children, and to understand how can we truly involve them in the process. So, who am I to say this? Well, you can call me simply Saloni. This is a fun logo which I designed a couple of years ago to kind of reflect my vibe. I am from Mumbai, a big city girl, big fan of the amazing Indian food and colorful pictures and festivals. It's been 2 years since I've moved to Germany, and my life went through like a 360-degree change. I came here for my master's in design research and studied from the design research program from Bauhaus University. And I have been always a person who likes to include the excluded and vouch for experiences to make it more inclusive for people. And designing for children wasn't like a decision which I had from the beginning. In fact, I did not even know about this field altogether. But why am I designing for them? Well, because once upon a time, I was a child. I mean, that gives me enough expertise, right, to design with children. Well, jokes apart, I think the picture here is a signifier for me to remember the little kid in me who was very excited and experimental and whiny and carefree at times. It was actually taken after one of the healthy baby contest or a pageant where my mom enrolled me. And yeah, such things exist. And even I was surprised. But I think this picture kind of makes me remember my inner child. And I would like you all to also picture yourself as a baby or as a kid, whatever earliest memory you have. And it is very important that before we get into designing for children, that we are compassionate for the kid in ourselves. Because if we don't nurture that kid, then it is quite difficult to empathize with other children as well. So I hope by end of this presentation, you kind of try to learn and unlearn your own methods of looking at children as well. So, as I was speaking earlier, I my career trajectory was a pure coincidence. I started I did my bachelor's in a fashion college in India, and during the process, I realized my strong, strong overall strength towards designing for children. I don't go by one specific title. I feel I'm a visual designer, researcher, and most importantly, a storyteller. I have realized that my strength lie also in being a facilitator and in general a play designer. So moving now to the current, I currently work for a children's mental health app in Germany. We also have the app available in English, French, and German. The app is basically kind of nurturing children's mental health through story cosmos and audio content. And currently, we have seen this rise between young baby and toddlers using our app. So I constantly read, learn about children a lot, and I will tell you about this more in the detail at the end of the presentation. But it's been great to work for a company which kind of nurtures and values child-centered mindset to the core. And now I would like to talk about how I got into like this childish niche and when it became my default niche, as per to say. So, in my initial years of even before getting into a design college, I did this project designing for a sexual predator behavior toolkit for children. And this was the first time I actually did something for them. And I have always received this comment from my initial freelance clients that my illustrations kind of look childish. Rather than getting offended by the statement, I decided to make it my strength. And this whole project was kind of interviewing a lot of women and a lot of people who have been through sexual harassment or have faced sexual predator behavior in their life. And I ended up designing this whole toolkit. And as you see, like this was during this project, I kind of find my strength of this childness, which I kind of tried to embrace. And I made a bunch of illustrations, postcards, interactive A to Z series, and it was really fun project, but I was very emotionally invested in it as well because it was not easy to design for such a delicate topic, which could also affect you in a way. But this was kind of my starting journey to designing for children. And now I would like get into the basics of our talk. So I hope like throughout this talk, we also practice some listening skills. So I would request you all, if you haven't done already, to switch off your phones or keep it on silent mode so that we try to be more presently aware. I know with growing time and every new reel, it's impossible for us to pay attention at something for a longer time, but we can try our best. And as I said before, I might have some interactive activity in the middle. So it would be nice if you can engage and interact with it. There will be a QR code which will be visible on the screen after some time in the middle of the slides. So the last thing which is important when you are listening is to also reflect in a conversation. Because I couldn't be there in person, we will try to still make it happen somehow. So I've always been on the other side of the table where I've attended conferences in person, and I've found myself like doodling, scribbling, or just writing the words which I hear. And this helps me to be grounded where I am. So can just suggest you that you might also like to do the same or any method which better suits you. So let's get right into the main topic of the agenda. Today, we are going to address three important key issues, one of which is the need of child centered design. Next is in what ways can we listen? And the third part is how can we integrate playfulness in products? So, starting with the need of child centered design, I was reading this book called as Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. And there's an indigenous activist called Alton Krenak. And his quote kind of really motivated me to think in direction. It says that you keep talking about another world, but have you asked the generations of tomorrow if the world you are building is the world they want? This is so true for me in a way that we always keep talking about building the future, but we are not even going to be here when the future arrives. So it's really important for the generations of tomorrow, for us to include them in the part of discussions or have them a seat at the table. This kind of also further links to the idea of how children are our future. And a quick Google search told me that 97% of households with children under age 15 years have access to internet in specifically to Australia. Honestly, these are quite impressive numbers as compared to the countries where I have worked before, being Germany and India. If you can say like such a huge amount of people or users are children, then it is also important for us to know if the products and services we are designing for them are catered specifically for their needs. While what I think about our current design research discourse, even though there has been such a big improvement as compared to past, is that It kind of looks like how you will make a kid wear adult clothes. Is basically we are trying to have this universal one size fits all solution, but we need to have more inclusive ways or design processes or find ways to include them and have them a seat at the table. So I there are going to be like little bit bunch of quotes in the talk because I am a person who tries to get inspiration from random parts of my life. So this is another TED talk which I really love, and I'm sure a lot of people have might have also come across it. It's by Chimamanda Adichie. She spoke about the danger of single story. What I really like about her talk is that she highlights the fact of how the single story creates stereotypes. That the problem is not that they're untrue, but they're incomplete. They make one story become the only story. So I tried to contemplate about this single story through more from a perspective of children or child centered design. And I kind of reflected on what is the single narrative which exists for children as users in interaction design context. So this is something which I've heard over the years working for different companies in this sector, that we always say that we know what is right for the child, or involving children is expensive and time consuming. Or it could be, what do children know about a subject matter? And also assuming their linear developmental growth, which is not the case for many of the users. There's no normal developmental growth, and every child is unique in a way. So there's this need to get outside these stereotypes so that we can have our own we can document our own stories. So coming to what is already done in this whole sector is there's a lot of work which is done in psychology, pedagogy, and also science, specifically by Jean Piaget or Vygotsky or John Dewey. And there's like ample of content which is available online or resources available online which talks about child-centered design. But why are we talking or addressing this talk in a design research conference? So I kind of relate to what Nigel Gross came up with, this term of design really ways of knowing. I feel we as a profession or as designers, researchers, or anyone who's interested in this field have this unique perspective to look at problems and kind of solve them through our own ways of looking at it. And it is extremely important in the changing times and how fast children are also growing and how fast they differ from previous generations for us to document and know our own designerly ways of knowing in this context. So now I would like to address the fact on in what ways can we listen better? Because once we understand the need of it, it's also further important to know how can we listen to them. So there are a lot of things which are available online, but briefly, during my master thesis, what I came across or learned myself is that you can either involve children as consultants, that is, you look at them as users, testers, informants in the process, or as collaborators, where you bring the child together for a project and service. And lastly, that it is child-led approach. So it is more like the child takes the driver's seat and guides you through the process, and they have more control in the decision making. I'm not saying like any one of this is good or bad. It totally depends on the project you have, the budget you have for it, and the kind of approach you as a designer want to take. So it could be a mix and match of all these approaches, or it could be something specific. But it is important to know what is existing and what you could make out of it. So I would now like to talk about this evolving map of design research, which I read a few years back, or by Liz Sanders. And it has kind of helped me to understand my position in design research context. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because she beautifully explains this kind of contradictory approach which exists in the design research field. Either a lot of people are design led or they could be research led. By research led, I mean anthropologists or people who come from arts and humanities background, who also have their unique perspective and a lot of things to add on, but their approaches might differ a lot. And secondly, either we have this expert mindset or as Hussein just mentioned in his talk previously about this participatory mindset. So she kind of tried to map it on the axis and have the top divided into design led approach and the bottom as research led. While on the right side, there is this expert mindset, which I would also explain further in detail, but mostly looking at subjects as users and informants or testers, while this participatory mindset is more of co-creative mindset. So this is overall the kind of map she came up with, where there's like this bubble and you can see a lot of like trending terms like user-centered design or critical design and design plus emotion, which is one of the newest bubble in this design research discourse. So it is important for us to understand that where do we stand on this? Like it is not something which is finalized, or it is like kind of sums up the design research field, but it's still like a good point for us to know in which bubble do we belong. And before even I go ahead in the presentation, I think it is important for you to retrospect where you position yourself. So I can just keep this map for a minute and briefly talk about different methods. And I'll also tell you where I position myself. It is mostly somewhere in the middle of this participatory design and user centered design. Because ever since I moved to Germany and I learned about the Scandinavian methods of including people as co creators, I realized how much I truly wanted to do that. But it is fine if someone comes from more of a user centered design mindset, because it is what might be needed for their product, and not every product is similar. So now I would like to do the activity, and I would urge you all to scan this QR code. Or if it does not work in any sense, you can go on slido.com and use this code, which is called as DR 2023. And there is this one question which I have uploaded on it for us to understand which kind of bubble do we truly belong in. So it's just to get like a overall perspective of everyone in the room. What are we more inclined towards to, or give you just a minute to reflect on this. So now I would like to switch back to the map, and it would be nice if you can answer that one question and you can see a live word map in the whole um, interactive slide. I'm doing this for the first time, so I'm also not sure how it would work, but I hope it works for you. I will switch to the map again. So you can, I already see a lot of responses. A lot of people are saying user centered design, usability testing, co design. That's generative design research. Yeah, I really thought a lot of people don't use that, but it's good to see. And the user centered design bubble is kind of becoming big. So yeah, it's a good exercise for us to kind of reflect once in a while that at my current gig goes, where do I stand? Where do I kind of position myself? Because our principles or our ideologies could differ from someone. And I don't want to give you my principles and say that you just use it for your product, because your own perspective also matters a lot. So thank you so much for participating in this. And you can still continue putting as much as you want. Um, but now I would like to move ahead in the presentation and talk about this expert mindset and participatory mindset through my projects. So, the expert mindset is actually designing for people, or in my context, designing for children. And as I had said before already, I won't repeat myself again and directly explain you this project I did where I thought I was more of designing for children. So, my project Type Tales is my side hustle, which I did in college, which was more about including the excluded. I worked with a Special Olympics India organization, which is basically Paralympics for kids with special needs. And during the COVID times, when everything was shutting down, it was becoming more and more difficult for children with special needs like autism spectrum disorder, Down syndrome, to adapt to the new changes and get outside their routine. So we designed an inclusive learning tool for them. And the way we did it was first to understand the entire ecosystem of the child. And then we try to interview everyone who kind of falls into that system, be it physiotherapists, occupational therapists, coaches, psychologists, caretakers, their parents, relatives, mentors, everyone. And then we try to understand how could we better facilitate to their needs. So this website is live and it's called a platform for kids to adapt to new changes. And we try to promote the idea of social emotional learning that could be like mindful through stories and have this whole narrative approach to it. Right now, we have stopped doing this project because a lot of things changed after COVID, but it's still very close to my heart, and I'm really proud of this project. And it kind of brought me close to this idea of working with people. But during that time, now when I retrospect, I realized that we did not really work with children. We kind of showed it to them, the prototypes, and worked with them and tried to use them as informants in the process rather than involving them to build something. So when you are working from a user expert mindset, it's important to look at your users beyond personas. And when you are not building something with them, you can try to understand them more by trying to collect some artifacts and trying to get to know about their environment. And we did that a lot by trying to tell people to send us pictures or show us the objects which they do use every day. So this could help you as a designer, researcher to read between the lines as well. So, one of my biggest key insights from this project was that parents and guardians often come as package when you design for kids, and they are not the sole decision makers. So, you have to think about the system and what factors could influence the behavior of the kids as well. And it's not just the child, because the child is not just making the decisions. So, this project was quite interesting, and you can check out the website later if you want. And now I would like to talk about one of my favorite mindset, which is participatory mindset, that is designing with people. So in this mindset, we see people as true experts in the domains of experiences of living, learning, and working. And we try to involve them as co-creators in the design process. So this whole mindset is kind of influenced by Scandinavia. And during my master thesis, I also visited Denmark and Sweden. Denmark really feels like a place too good to be true because it kind of promotes playful learning to such an extent. But I had the fortune to interview Casper Mathisen, who is co-founder of D4CR, Designing for Children Rights. And this kind of quote, which he said during our interview, still holds a special place for me. He said that designing for children is actually designing for humans. I don't distinguish between children and grown-ups. For me, grown-ups are children that are broken. It's kind of this bold statement for me to understand that how we can look at children as benchmarks for creating experiences which are also better for adults. So I would now like to move the focus to more of this participatory approach. But before we get into it, I would like to talk about play because play was an integral part of the project I worked on. So play could mean like different things for different people. For me, it is something which is more of colors, something like Disneyland, or it could be of games. And it is more of an interactive, fun vibe to it, but not necessarily play should always be just linked to something of that sort, right? Play is actually a pleasure activity taken for no apparent reason. And the ability to play is critical not only to be happy, but also to sustaining social relationships and being a creative, innovative person. So, Stuart Brown had mentioned this. Overall, you're looking at play more than like fun activity and including the importance of it in our daily lives. And if we look back at in our childhood, we have always been associated with play in some or the other way. When we observed our siblings or friends playing, as a spectator play or an imaginative play when we played with our toys. Or it could be the rough and tumble play, which you see more in nature between animals. And it could be also social play where we actually play with other people and involve our community. So I used play as a method of inquiry in my research process. And I conducted a 6 months research with children in Berlin. And it was an interesting project because I was very scared as an Indian working in Germany with children from refugee and immigrant backgrounds. But one of my professors said something interesting, which kind of made me hold my positionality very unique. He said that I, from a different culture, interviewing children from different cultures, in third different culture, should be the speciality, and I shouldn't doubt myself in this. So I went ahead and I conducted my master thesis with this quick key question of in what ways can co design intervention aid listening actively and empower children through play? So the whole kind of research was as a practice based research, I would like to say, because I wanted to also use my skills as a visual communication designer in this. And I was sometimes practitioner, researcher, also facilitator. I conducted few pilot workshops with my friends as well in Berlin to first go through the rehearsal because directly working with children was quite difficult for me. And in this process, I learned from experts a lot. I interviewed people in Denmark and Sweden and also in Berlin, and also attended few workshops in Berlin and Dortmund, which was with Save the Children. So these kind of methods exposed me to what I could learn from other people, this practitioner's tacit knowledge, as I would say. And the overall approach for me was like figuring. So when you are drawing, as this image you could see on your top left, when you're drawing, you just go with the intuition and how better it could be. And you treat as the whole thing as an open playground. And I conducted my research with just like an abstract research question and then diving into it. So this project kind of helped me to understand how can I involve children in the design research process. So I conducted these making future ideas tangible workshops with immigrant and refugee children. And it was quite interesting because the children came from different backgrounds, the multicultural children, even though they belong to different countries, because they grew up in Germany, they do not speak English. And being a person from India who feels so confident in English, it came as a surprise for me. And I knew like basic German, but I still tried to understand them and understood the importance of non-verbal communication. And the image on the left hand side, which you see, is with children in refugee accommodation. They were from Moldova. So in that, it was more difficult because they spoke in Russian. And overall, I felt it could be impossible to communicate with them. But I remember when I first went into the class, I played this German rhyme, which I was trying to learn to improve my German, and I realized the level of proficiency I have in German and they have in German was similar. And we all just started dancing as an ice breaking activity. So it was very important for me to build that comfort zone and for them to look at me at an eye level. Because if they don't have that comfort zone with me, they would always look at me as a teacher or their parent. So I had to break that wall. And I also involved people who speak, like volunteers who speak Russian, to help me in this, so that they acted as a Trojan horses to help me understand what they were saying. And I I generated a lot of material. And I also gave them freedom to choose to tell their story through building things with clay or with something, whatever they feel comfortable with. There were Legos, there were sketch pens, there were images. So it's kind of like finding a middle ground between it. And for this, I generated like the whole material was generated by me. So this is where my practitioners expertise came into place. And the most difficult part of this project was surprisingly the recruitment, because recruiting users for workshops from a website could be easier, but as a immigrant in a completely new country, it was very difficult for me to find contacts. And with children, it is very important to get consent from the parents and get started with everything. So I remember just putting a lot of posters in Berlin, visiting refugee accommodations. And in one of the accommodation I visited, the person made me directly talk to the children. And I remember getting rejected by 13 children because they did not find my workshop fun enough to come. So that time I understood that I cannot use the words like co-designing for future. I had to like come to the basic point, like how could you explain it to a 5-year-old so that you can convey the message and also understand what would be the incentive for them to come to your research or be part of your research. because coming from a background where I wanted to work in a very controlled environment, this project was something which was out of my comfort zone. But I tried to make it fun by having these kind of activities, by asking them, when was the last time you felt connected with anything? And they had to like draw a picture out of it and then talk in the class to explain it to everyone what that means. So, this whole mode of giving them this creative freedom was very important for me. And having it in both the languages which they're comfortable with was also important. But at the same time, for example, with kids with Moldova, they could not read, but they could understand spoken Russian. So a lot of things you discover on the way, and it is impossible to predict all of these things before the workshop. So it always helps to do something as a pilot workshop, but also making space for surprises. So coming to that point, as I said, it is important to be it is important to not be outcome driven. You have to keep room for surprises, immerse yourself in their environment, and create a comfortable space for them, nurturing the relation over the course of time. So it is not something which you can, because children are so honest, that is not something which you can build immediately. You need to give it time. And if a project allows you to do so, it is also important that you build the overall relation and gradually progress. Now, the third and the most important part is how can we integrate playfulness in products? So, we understood the need of child centered design and in what ways can we cater to people. So, let's talk about some practicality and how we can do it in products and services. So, there are some of the big companies which I'm fan of, like Toka Boka Games, Lego Group from Denmark, Billund, Save the Children NGO, System Workshop in US, and Zagomini. They are doing really incredible work in this field, and they are in very different kind of products as well. But it is kind of inspirational because they also keep launching their research reports, and it is good if you're someone who's interested in this field to keep an eye for everything which other people from different continents and countries are doing. Uh, and one of such organization is Designing for Children Rights. It was initially started by the Nordics, but also like other people from Germany, and it is mostly Nordic influenced. But T4CR, Designing for Children Rights, is a very interesting website which has different chapters all over the world. And they came up with this manifesto, which is like a evolving guide to have these principles that tell you about how can you involve children, or like consider children rights in more ethical way in your product and service. So if you go on their website, you can see it's called children'sdesignguide.org. So you can see that how they have come up with these 10 principles from three different spaces, one of which is designing for inclusion, designing for play and learning, and design for safety and sustainability. For example, the first principle is gather and respect children's views, which includes the right to participate and right to be heard. So when you click on each principle, you'll be able to know more about, like, they have framed the whole thing from a child's perspective. And I would try to explain few of these principles how we used in my current company where I'm working now. So moving to Omeo again. Omeo, as I said before, is a family focused story cosmos for mindful and sleep relaxation. And being a completely audio first product, it is very playful in nature, but at the same time, we had to understand that we need to set some rules. So we got inspired by loosely inspired by the T4CR principles, and then tried to make three of our own principles on basis of that. The first one was every child is unique. So there's this right of non-discrimination, and for us, it stands that every child is different and unique and have their own experiences. So we wanted to make it more diverse, inclusive, and non-stigmatization. So we have this one category where you can build your avatar, and we have made sure that every avatar which you build does not look similar. You can kind of mix and match different kind of outfits, and a lot of this visually reflects into the kind of skin colors, the kind of accessories, the kind of things you try to show, because we are not kind of trying to promote any normal here, and it is kind of, you know, overall reflecting the reality of the world. So this is one of the way which we are kind of doing it in our app. The second is there is no normal. This is of audio first app. So it is, we have tried to make it accessible for children with vision impairment or dyslexia. It was actually started for children with ADHD, but it slowly kind of grew into a sleep and relaxation app. So overall, there's this idea where we also want to promote that we want to gather and respect children's views. We conduct at least 2 or 3 user calls with families every week, and we try to make sure that we don't take a lot of data from the families, because a child's information is very private, and if they want to, then only they should share. So all of these things, like not using their real names and making the whole research anonymous, is something which is very important for us as well. And the third one is everyone can play. So allowing and supporting exploration. So we plan to do a lot of co-creative workshops. And right now, since our kind of target is changing from to baby toddler parents, and as I said before, that parents are something which come as like packages with children. So we cannot just call children and no one would send their kids just to our company. So we kind of try to also want to involve parents with their children in these workshops. But even when Omeo was initially built, they did a lot of co-creative workshops, and we try to understand the routines of the children in more interesting and creative manner. So we have this thing called as child consultancy, where we try to consult children in the app development and try to include them as users and creators. And lastly, the right to leisure and play. So children and adults are alike. So we try to not just say that it's playful because it's for children, but our user group or the target group is actually parents. So we kind of try to treat play as not something which is just for fun, and it could also be for adults. So the final takeaways for the whole thing which I've been talking about for so long is that first, it is very important to establish space for children. So as I said, comfort is a getaway to child's heart. Creating a safe space to listen to their needs and then making it without making it outcome driven is very important. Second is to look at them at eye level. Wherever possible, you have to try to keep your expert hat aside. You have to be open for surprises and not try to guide the research in the way you want, but kind of let them also understand that you are not coming from a very expert perspective. Lastly, it is also important to understand that it is not just the child who is the sole decision maker, but everyone around the ecosystem of the child. It could be their caretaker, teachers, it could be anyone who your product is working with. And the fourth point is to foster meaningful child participation. So one of the important things, and this was such a fun revelation for me, was that you have to understand how can you incentivize children's participation beyond money and purely by not just making it very outcome oriented, but actually having fun. So one of the important things which I did in my workshops with the refugee and immigrant children was to have snacks or breaks. And it was amazing how influenced they got, or how much joy they had on their face when they saw some cookies and stuff kept on the table. So that these were like the little things which can make your workshop or whatever project you have more fun and interesting. So you need to understand and try to find a middle ground in something you want and something other people would like. So coming to the potential of the whole child-centered design, I think we need to move away from the single narrative of childhood. There is no global childhood which exists. We need to, as responsible designers and researchers, come up with more localized experiences of childhood. As a person who experiences childhood in India versus someone who's in Australia or in Europe, our childhood could look very different. And it's important for us to document, learn, and listen to these stories so we can come up with more cross-cultural perspectives, because they are so important. And lastly, thank you so much for listening and learning with me. And I hope overall it helps you to kind of foster this whole knowledge in your field and your own zone. But thank you. And that's it from me. You can reach out to me if you want to know more about Omeo or if you have any more questions. And yeah, keep listening, learning, and growing.
Thank you very much. Let me just quickly see whether we have questions that have been sent through. Hold on. Questions for Saloni. I don't see any there. Does anyone in the audience have a question that you want to ask? Otherwise, I'll fire away. Yes, hang on. Yeah. Hang on. Use the mic so that we can hear it.
Children, obviously, there's a pretty broad spectrum. I don't know if anyone's ever been involved as a child at 16, 17 in research. I'm interested to understand how you can be flexible in your approaches to make it inclusive for all ages.
You mean inclusive also for adults or anyone?
Young adults.
Young adults. Yeah, it's not just making it inclusive for 0 to 5-year old or 5 to 10-year old, but it's important to understand the diverse needs and backgrounds they come from. And it could be physical, mental needs, and it could be also something related to age group. But it is important to find a middle ground in all of these approaches. And as I said, through my playful inquiry, I did not mean to make it just for children, but how can you make even asking questions or involving people in a collaborative workshop more interesting? And for that, you need to come up with ways or think of ways which are more creative and playful. So, yeah, and at the same time, also inclusive, where you are respecting their different needs.
That's great. Thank you. I'm curious to pick up on that. You were talking about the language barriers in one of those activities or one of those case studies that you were talking about. You were able to get around it, but were you? What role can interpreters or translators play in those sorts of settings, and do we lose anything along the way by doing so?
Yeah, that's a great question, because when I was working in this context, I felt so lost, and I thought that I'm not adding any significance to this whole research field. So I tried to involve people who actually speak that language, who are kind of closely related to them. And as I said, they acted as these Trojan horses for me to guide through. One of the things which I did was to come up with a physical toolkit, which I tried to give to the kids and also the volunteers who were part of this, who spoke their language. And I had these reflections or learning takeaways for them. So they tried to write after every activity what they understood from it, so that we are kind of trying to document these kind of things which might get lost in translation sometimes. But it's important to understand your positionality, that sometimes you cannot just understand beyond your capacity. So at that time, you need to ask for help and include people who would be more right in that current setting.
That's great. Thank you. I'm conscious that it's after midnight and getting late for you, so please join me in thanking Saloni for that presentation.